And the place I want to start was, I guess, try to use these discussions of bodies and pain that we started the meeting with to look at the novel. And the place I'd like to begin then is to ask you to identify some ways in which bodies are depicted here. Just, there's a lot of physical description of characters, not only Solander, but Harriet Wonger and Niels Bierman and so forth. And the idea here is to sort of try to understand how the novel is depicting these characters as a means of understanding the conflicts in the novel. Remember, that's where we ended last time, in asking, like, what are the conflicts in this novel? And I just would argue to you that the way in which the novel depicts those conflicts happens a lot through its representation of the body. That is, the images of the body and the way that the characters are depicted as embodied characters has a lot to do with the conflicts that the novel wants to talk about. So I'll point beyond that to the next question that we'll sort of try to use the second half of the second part of the meeting for. That is, comes back actually to, I was talking to Gabrielle during the break, and then this came up in a lot of the comments about pain. And that is that there's a politics of pain. That's the way the term I'm using for comments that people made, like that Susan and Caitlin, Emily and Jennifer made, and that politics is that certain identities are allowed to experience pain or inflict pain on others, and others either they cannot talk about their pain or can't inflict it on others. For example, if you think about in a sort of crude way that the 9/11 and then post 9/11 torture situation or extreme rendition, whatever, that in a sense like the idea was that there was this terrorist attack against the United States, and that is not okay, right? You cannot inflict that kind of pain on us, and as a consequence, we're going to inflict some serious pain on other parts of the world, right? Maybe you disagree with that depiction or whatever. This is a schematic, kind of crude way of talking about it. But one thing you could see there is you could argue that part of the whole historical event is about who's allowed to inflict pain on whom, right? It's the same way when we think about like parents, right? That it's okay for them to inflict pain on their children by way of deprivation, or we maybe think about imposition of physical pain in a little bit more stigmatized way now, but nevertheless, they can take things away from their children, and the idea of the developing child makes legitimate all kinds of forms of intervention in the kid's life that inflict pain, right? You can't go, you're grounded, you can't go see your best friend, you go sit in your room without dinner, etc., right? Go suffer, right? And I'm going to make you suffer, right? I mean, that's what's going on there, right? And it's okay, that's like, and you say to the parent, like from some neutral perspective, you shouldn't do that. And they're going to defend themselves, right? Of course I can do that. I have every right to do that. That's my job, right? That's my responsibility as a parent, to inflict pain on my child, right? But that's we think of that as like the role of the parent, right? That they're the arbiter of the pain, right? And is it okay if the child comes and does that to the parent, right? No, it's not, for some reason. Right, and then you get to then you see think about these kind of cultural instances like movies, right, where there's this classic fight right between the teenage boy and the father where he knocks him down and beats the hell out of him, right, where it's like, I'm a man, I can take you, I'm going to beat you down, right? This kind of idea that suddenly the tables are turned, I can inflict the pain now on you, and you're going to really suffer, right? Because I'm going to go a step farther than you. There's these ideas, and of course, something like that, that's about, right, it's about masculinity, it's about authority, it's about all these kinds of social identities that are in conflict and really have to do with who could inflict the pain, who has to suffer the pain. So, I'm just talking to Gabrielle, just reflecting on that conversation, talking about the Fossum novel, right? In a way you have a contest, or her comments helped me see this, or I learned from her, that you can think of that novel too as about a contest with different kinds of pain, right? Green's pain as the pedophile trying to control himself, a product of his own circumstances, where he's been victimized and suffers a lot of pain as a consequence. And so, but that pain is illegitimate, right? The pedophile's pain is illegitimate culturally. We will not listen to that pain. And God forbid that person imposes pain upon another, right? A child. But the legitimacy but then there's another kind of pain there, right? Which is the children and their parents' pain, right? Where Jonas August's mother, she suffers, right? We see her there's this funeral scene that just like pushes the pain on us, right? Where she's wailing in the church and whatever. Extraordinary, like, depiction of pain. She's at the 10, right, on the scale. And that's an okay pain, right? We kind of want that pain. We want to really see that the trauma of the sufferer there. And that's a good pain for us, right? Because we really, that's legitimate. A parent should love his or her child. But that's, that's a kind of politics of pain. Who should experience pain? Who has the right to impose pain? Who doesn't have the right to experience pain? Who doesn't have the right to inflict pain on others? And so we can start with like looking at who these people are by the way their bodies are depicted and just kind of puzzle that out a little bit. But what we're working to is to think a little bit more about who are these people and what rights they have with respect to pain in the novel. Because that's one way to read this novel, would be to say it's about pain and who can experience pain and who can't experience pain. Right? And some of the problems that arise there. So let's just start with, choose one of these characters, Bierman, Solander, Harriet Wonger, someone else in a group, and just look for one or two examples of how they're depicted as an embodied character. And then we'll share those examples with each other and try to puzzle out a little bit about how the depiction of the body is the depiction of an identity. Okay? So let's take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about it as a class.
That's a bad habit to stop it, and then that's a problem.
Try to get a specific example you can share with the.
She's depicted as a knight how I would at first when I started reading this book, I had no idea that she was this one. I thought she was very like complicated. She knew
It's like she's putting up a program to keep people.
Yeah, but when I first read it, and then they started explaining these things, like, oh yeah, she's on 9 pounds. I was like, wow, I did not expect that. She's a small little figure that I can like. She's only 90 pounds, you know what I mean? Like, it's a phrase, okay? You have a lot of English to learn. You're shaking that with me. You're going to learn all this language. It just means you can, like, it's easy to, like, I guess, like, I was saying, I could bench 200 pounds, like, I eat that, right? That doesn't mean like, piece of shit. Anyway. At least for
even like, you know, she's just like her outer appearance is almost like an animal that has like spikes or like has red coloring inside its like she's trying to put up these warning signs to keep would-be predators.
that is really no big deal. No big deal. That's cool. But yeah, I like that. But again, like Jason Linda, I do not expect it to be that's like personality. Just the dragon, like the one side. You can't see that one, but that's
it's supposed to kind of signify how she's viewed by. You know, like when all movies are like this first men. He was standoffish at first. He didn't know how to approach her until she started showing how knowledgeable she was. like how image she was to show like how she was and like piercing.
Oh no, it also said when she went out, she put on like lipstick and whatnot. She's like, oh yeah, she looked like
she was trying to when she went to meet her
with her brother or whatever. Mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was trying to help her.
Okay, let's turn back to class here. And the question was, I'll put it just sort of this way: representations of bodies. Here, just I guess that I kind of don't like to use this term representations. It's a very common term in literary studies, cultural studies, the representation, right? And the idea is that we're not talking about actual bodies, but a representation, right? So it's a sort of an artistic or cultural way of depicting something. But let's turn to that topic, and I want to hear what you chose and your analysis. Yeah.
I feel like for Solander, like the way that she has tattoos and piercings and looks off what the norm might look for a female, especially in Sweden. She's almost kind of doing how animals will have like red markings or they'll have spikes to try and keep away would-be predators.
Oh, okay. So it's like
she's coming off as she's trying to protect herself by looking maybe harder than she might actually do.
We'll put it in a kind of a technical way. Protective apparatus. It's like something she's developed in order as a means of protection for herself. So that it's that's we talked a little bit last time with the sort of expression versus costume, and that's more of the costume idea that she's putting something on in order to guard herself.
I think it's part of her way of showing that she's not dainty because her physical appearance or childlike, because she's like considered by the state to be immature.
Right. Okay.
And not responsible. So I think it's her way of physically representing that she's adult enough to have all these tattoos and piercings and stuff.
Which is sort of an interesting way to put it. It's her way of conveying a sense of maturity, adulthood, and so forth. That is, which relates to maybe a perception on her own part, a recognition on her own part of because of her small stature, of the common perception that she's not adult enough, or that her problematic status for the state, right? That she's considered a ward of the court, right, who has this guardian who looks after her and so forth, and so that she's sort of projecting outward a kind of a competence and a adulthood somehow. Good, yeah. Okay, so it's a way of keeping people at a distance as well. Let me just ask, like, the physical description of Solander, why would that keep people at a distance? What is it about her appearance that keeps people at? I mean, I guess I'm asking you to abstract a little bit, that beyond like the individual character itself. But what is it about that appearance and its description that conveys to you that would keep people at a distance? Jakes?
I guess because it's just not as normal.
Okay, so there's a sense of norm and exception.
It's kind of standard animalistic nature to when something is different to kind of keep your distance from it.
Okay.
You know what exactly.
So there's like a universalist argument that when if there's a sort of a norm in a group and someone is an exception to that norm, then there's a sort of a uncertainty about it and maybe a distancing that occurs. Garter?
I think that also, like, when it comes to tattoos, like, if you see somebody with a lot of tattoos, there's, like, stereotype or stigmatism, like, that they're a tough person, not to mess with them, or just, like, leave them alone.
Okay, so cultural stereotypes it invokes as well, right? That it's a kind of a script. That is that the certain way of bodily marking is it like is a way of inviting a certain reading of the body, right? In a way, I guess is what it's say that is the outside maps to the inside somehow. Whether that's true or not, right? Because the part of the novel, right, is a revelation of that things aren't as they appear, right? You can't judge a book by the cover, in a sense. Other thoughts here about the way that she's depicted. Okay, so let's turn to other characters here, and we can then come back and think of Elizabeth? No, I'm sorry. What was it? What's your name again? No, I'm pointing. Yeah, you. Yeah, Kathleen. Right. I'm sorry.
Henry Fonger.
Okay.
Talk about him as being so almost as if basically the search for his niece has been all-consuming, like physically.
Did you say Scarecrow? Yeah. So he's like withered somehow, right? And the idea is that, as you say, like some notion of consumption, that it's consumed his body, his obsession with his niece, his loss, right, has altered his body over time. Right? Yeah, good. Other so Henrik Vonger, really more. It's an interesting one. I just this is like one that I have to talk about the film for a second. Does anyone remember who played Vonger in the Fincher adaptation? People have seen the movie. Christopher Plummer. Now, who's Christopher Plummer? Why that casting choice? To me, it's quite brilliant, actually. It's one of the good things about that film. Anyone? Colonel Von Trapp, right, from The Sound of Music? Or Admiral Von Trapp, whatever it is. You know, and if people have seen The Sound of Music, it's like, if you remember the story, right, that Maria, Julie Andrews, comes to the home of the Von Trapps. There's been like 10 governesses before her. And how does she enter the home? People remember this have people seen The Sound of Music? Everyone's seen it, right? Right? He's whistling, right? He whistles at the children, these 8 kids, in order to make them do what he wants, and they each have their individual whistle that he can call with them. He's like, taking the techniques of the naval officer and apply them to his family, right? It's like the ultimate picture, in cinematic language, of the Marshall family, the military family, and completely off the rails. It should not be that way. And, of course, so, whether you think it's syrupy or you like it, what happens, right, he softens up over time. But that's the contrast in that actor between this, like, the man who, like, wears a tie to breakfast on Saturday, right, and is, whistling at his children, or wears his uniform to breakfast on Saturday or whatever, and then this sort of soft-hearted, emotional person. And, of course, that's what Henrik Vonger is in a way, too, that the scion, right, of the family, all starch and stiff upper lip, and then also someone, right, who loves his niece and has been touched by this thing. So that kind of contrast in character between this extraordinary strictness and self-control and then vulnerability. This is something, that's the way that, Fincher read the novel. And it seems like that's one, it makes that character somewhat, in a way, more interesting than perhaps the character is in the novel with that casting choice. But this withering is a little bit different. That's a great observation. The Scarecrow, right? The Scarecrow is emptied, of course, a straw figure. Also an effigy. That's an interesting term to think about here. What is a scarecrow? It's not a person, right? But a figure, right? An empty figure, right? What do we do with effigies, right? We burn them. But it's like the substitute, the stand-in, the proxy, someone who is not that thing but stands for it. In that way, it's a interesting one too, because what does he stand for? That kind of emptied out body. It's like Swedish capitalism, the old way, the old manners, whatever. And they're not doing very well, are they? Other thoughts about Henrik? Yeah, Austin. Okay, old an old style, right, the bow tie, and confident, that he's not subject to social expectations in the same way, right? This is a person, when we're thinking about who can inflict the pain, he's like the kind of person that can inflict the pain, right? And he's used to it. He's willing to lay them all off, right? I'm not going to worry about that. Charlie. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happened here. If excuse me. I'm going to just try to make the screen smaller here. Did that do it? I don't. This is a bad path to be on right now to go here. Is that better? Okay. Okay, so old and confident. Very good. Okay, thank you, Charlie, for pointing that out. Other things about Wonger? What about Harriet? Anyone do Harriet? Anyone? No. What other characters did you choose? Yeah.
We talked about Bierman.
Okay. Very good.
Basically, when he's introduced, he's just described as a very kind of normal-looking sort of guy. Sort of, over 50, trim body, thinning hair, cleft chin, gray eyes, and he's pretty nondescript. And actually, once Elizabeth is done with him, he now has a tattoo that basically declares him for what he is. She rewrites what his body needs.
Okay, very good, yeah.
With the tattoo, I'm a sadistic fake pervert and a rapist.
Gets rewritten, right? So, this is an interesting thing to think about right away, that depicted from the beginning as normal, right, to her exception. And what happens is this transformation where what appears normal is like effectively branded physically as deviant, perverse, and highly stigmatized, right? So that normalcy is transformed into exception, deviancy. That's and then you can ask, we can sort of turn to that bigger question of like who has the right to inflict pain and who doesn't. Right? Of course, as the normal one, that's one of the privileges of normalcy, right? Is to be able to invisibly inflict pain on others, right? It's the exception, the other who doesn't have that right. The mainstream, right? It can do that, right? Right, when we want to celebrate the Seahawks, we'll shut down the city. Damn it! Right, I was there, so I can say that. Right, but the idea is that when there's that kind of like normalcy and the ordinary, there's a privilege that comes with that. And Bierman, right, he's depicted as that kind of character in his introduction. Other aspects about him, or his bodily image. Anyone else? Were there any other have we talked about the people that you analyzed here? Okay. Let's turn. Okay, let's kind of keep these ideas in the background here with the bodies. And the next thing, my next question I wanted to turn to was, how is pain represented or depicted in the novel? And that's just an open-ended question. There's obviously these horrific episodes that are depicted, but I'd just like to ask in kind of an open-ended way, and then we can maybe turn to the question of like what's up with that? Why? Why the pain? Why the focus on the pain? But to begin with, what are some examples or instances of pain that are depicted in the novel? So we've always been doing this kind of doing it in small groups. So let's just talk about it as we'll start with a class. responding to that question, I can write down some of the things. But just thinking about how the novel depicts pain, what are instances of pain here, and try to be precise about, try to be precise about the various instances instead of just like, oh, it's about pain in general, but what are the specific examples? Delineate between them, in other words. Susan, you want to say something?
I think the first one right out of the box is the most interesting in that, because you're not probably thinking about it, but it's the judicial system.
Okay.
Infliction of pain under the normal rule of law with evidence that he's punished.
So, let's see here. So Blomqvist's suffering the hands of the law.
That's kind of the social.
Right. Yeah. I guess as we go along here, we can maybe take a pause for each one of these. I mean, what is the pain there?
Goes to jail.
He goes to jail, right? Deprivation, right? So he's sentenced to prison, right? Of course, this is like talking about pain. That's the ultimate control of pain is in the hands of the state, right? This one definition of the state. A monopoly on violence, right? That's Max Weber, if people have read sociology at all. The state is the only legitimate actor who controls violence. And what is violence but the infliction of pain, one could argue, right? And so here we have the state action beginning this, sending Blomqvist off to prison, or, if you can call that pain in Sweden. That's where it begins. Is there more to it than that, Caitlin?
Well, I was going to add, in terms of being in the hands of the law, Solander's basically been having,
right.
Someone's been given rights to control her life.
Okay, so Solander, I'll put parallel victim, right? That she too has been deprived by the state of a whole basket of rights by having this guardian ad litem or guardian of the court assigned to her who controls, has power of attorney for her. And so anything that she needs that has any kind of institutional dimension to it is subject to that person's approval. Yeah.
Henry's experience of pain from the disappearance of Mary.
Right, okay, so Henrik's loss, right, which is the beginning of the novel, this epilogue, right, where this elaborate depiction of the kind of the traumatic consequences of her loss. Kathleen?
And it's not only depicted in how he looks, but it's also depicted in kind of the obsessive nature of his loss because of the just massive amount of documents he's collected.
Okay.
Missing.
Body, but also like obsession, right? Of course, this is like another way to think about pain, right? Obsession, and let me give like the scab, right? That you keep scratching at the scab, like pulling it off again, causing that pain, right? There's something about it, which is a structure of trauma. People argue that when you really suffer something, it's sort of too much for you to understand, and so you keep going back to it and repeating it, right? And collecting it and obsessing with it, and that's a way of trying to cope with the pain and keep, in a way, repeating the pain in miniature as a means of saying, I can deal, even though you can't deal. The obsession is the ultimate proof that you can't deal. You got to keep going back there, right? If you really dealt with it, right, you move on. But when you can't move on, you keep going back to it. So Henrik, he can't deal. He's got to go back and keep hammering at it. It's got him imprisoned. James.
Adding on to that, he's also getting reminded, like every year he gets a pressed flower and whatnot from some random person that he doesn't know. Constantly reminds him.
So this is how is this presented as a kind of torture, right? That this sort of taunting from afar, where he receives these gifts that commemorate the loss of Harriet, right? Symbolically call to mind for him her loss. And it's depicted as an infliction of pain, right? This whole catalog of flowers that show him, remember what happened, right? The murder, he says, the murderer is trying to destroy me. Right? It's interesting right away, like repetition is so much a part of these things. This is a novel also about repetition, right? And of course, families are about repetition, right? Or reproduction. What's a family supposed to do? It reproduces itself. It keeps going, right? You reproduce the family name, or whatever. But one generation to the next. And here, what are they reproducing? Nazism, death and destruction, right? Trauma, these horrible things. And, who's at what do they stand for? Sweden, right? So there's this very strongly dystopian aspect to, which is something further reading, but you can, as we get forward in the novel, but it is worth thinking about what's going on with the family here. And, of course, this is one of the things you'll start to notice in this novel, like any kind of what you would call, like the Bjurmans, right? Depicted as Caitlin observed, as the norm, the ordinary. He's kind of like a paunchy middle-aged guy with the receding hairline, and he dresses in a kind of a, in a business-like fashion, right? Joe Blow, right? Out on the street. He's normal, right? He's a crazy-ass, rapist, right? Using his office in the state to inflict damage on vulnerable people, right? The norm is perverse, in other words. Versus the Wagner family, right? They're supposed to be this upstanding family, and they're the same thing. They're like under the shell of normalcy. There's this disappeared niece. There's these horrible things that have happened. This trauma that won't go away. There too, something's amiss. And then what about Mikael Blomkvist and Erica Berger? They have this unorthodox relationship that is, this open marriage and so forth. What's supposed to be perverse, that's actually normal. That's the good thing, right? It gets charged as morally the positive alternative. And there's a lot of that kind of reversal that the novel tries to do, where what is first perceived as exceptional and somehow outside the norm, Solander, right, is in fact the morally good, and then what appears to be normal and appears to be sort of comporting with our expectations of what the good should be is actually, right, the Niels Bjurman, the monster, right, masquerading as normal. So that's an interesting contrast to keep your eye on as the novel develops, is like, how is normalcy depicted, and how is the exception or the other depicted, and then how do they invert or reverse our usual expectations. Okay, so these are a few aspects of, in response to the question about how is pain part of the novel. Were there other examples that people thought of or would think of? Yeah.
I guess going back to the point is there's also his struggle with Eric, that his struggle with his company that he built up with her, and then his struggle with their relationship once he leaves the company and he leaves to go home.
Right. That there's a lot of sort of pain there in the sense that he's like, there's loss, right? He's facing this significant loss of himself, the thing that he's worked for, in a way that the body is, or he's invested himself so heavily in this magazine that's been now wrenched away from him. That's a painful experience as well, in the sense of deprivation of the thing that he's worked so hard for. So yeah, Blomkvist is again sort of depicted as a victim here. Is he a victim at the beginning of the novel? People think so? I mean, it's interesting to note, think of the question like in relationship to Solander, remember? Where she experiences this horrible rape, right? And then what does it say that, if I can find my page reference here. Let me see here if I can just pull it up. Let's see. Okay. so this is like where she's thinking about what to do next after this attack by Bjorman, right? And this is on page 237 in my copy. Even though she was well aware of what a woman's crisis center was for, it never occurred to her to turn to one herself. Crisis centers existed in her eyes for victims, and she never regarded herself as a victim. Consequently, her only remaining option was to do what she'd always done, take matters into her own hands and solve problems on her own. That was definitely an option, right? So there's this like, I mean, is Blomkvist a victim? Is she a victim? Where she says, I'm not a victim, right? Of course she's a victim, technically, victim of a crime, and yet doesn't think of herself as a victim. This is one of the things about her character. Does she suffer pain? How does she suffer pain? I mean, physically it's depicted as like messed up for a week and, you know, physically damaged by this rape. It doesn't spare. It's like the novel wants to go into the details of like her pelvis was hurting and so forth. Like that, it wants to like drive home the physical violation that she experiences as pain, but she doesn't think of herself as a victim. Does she experience mental pain, Gabrielle?
Well, I feel like when you think of somebody that's a victim, it's like that person needs help. Like if there's a victim, I don't know, and she doesn't want the help. So even though she was a victim, she doesn't want to think of herself as that to strip the like poor me, like come help me.
Yeah, so that the victim, sort of structurally, to put it that way, is someone in need of help, right? If you're victimized, you need help. You need the intervention of the law, or you need some sort of crisis center to help you, or whatever. And she fundamentally rejects this idea that she is a person who needs any help, and so she can't be the victim, even though she is the victim.
Well, I think, like, adding on to that, it's that she thinks, she doesn't think of herself as a victim because she thinks she can take care of it herself. Not necessarily that she doesn't need help, but that the help she needs is something she can provide on her own without having to get an outside source. Okay, so that it's like, I can resolve the pain myself. I can deal with the pain myself. Yeah.
Right. It's a sort of an interesting way of, I mean, narration. That's that, you know, what's going on in her mind. I don't know I obviously don't know what's going on in your mind, but you know, sometimes if you have an experience where you experience some kind of pain or you have some sort of accident or something like that, I like deny it to myself sometimes. I kind of deny the pain as a means of convincing myself that the accident wasn't so bad, right? Where you're like, something happens that you didn't want to happen or whatever, and you kind of minimize it to yourself or to someone else as a means of sort of saying, well, it wasn't that bad, right? Whether that's just in kind of in a trivial way, where you're like, oh yeah, not a big deal, or in a more serious way where something actually bad did happen, and you don't want to, you kind of like, you face your own mortality or whatever, you know, and you're like, that wasn't that bad, you know, it's only a flesh wound, right? You know, these kinds of things where the minimizing is a way of asserting self-control. I wonder, is this like a minimizing in that way that she's doing? Where she, in a way, denies the pain as a means of reasserting her self-control. Seems like there's something of that, which is very interesting, right? Because the character is depicted, this small person who is out of control, right? Has very little control over her life, and yet control is so important to her. That's one of the contradictions of her character, right? Where she's so lacking in privilege, and yet, on the other hand, so concerned with exercising it. Other ways in which pain is part of the novel here, or examples that come to mind. Yeah, Tao.
Just thinking about how she ended up doing her piercing and tattoo. It's like inflicting her pain to her body. It's like probably like, I don't know how she feel about it, but showing out. Just like showing out to others that she got the pain on herself, but she's still surviving it. Maybe.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing that she sort of marks herself, inflicts pain upon herself as a response to this rape. Right? That Tao's pointed out, where it seems to be some kind of, you said it was, Or how did you make sense of it?
It's just like her appearance is like tattoo and piercing everywhere.
Uh-huh.
It's just like she's like by herself. It's like just like response to the whole world that giving her that she experienced the pain and she's still living in it.
Yeah.
But she's still fine.
In a way, right, that as Hal argues, the tattoo is suggested to be like a record of the pain, a visual representation on her body, surface of the pain she experienced that we can't see, right, because it's an event that happened in her past. And, right, we know she's covered with tattoos, so is that supposed to mean that, I mean, if the tattoos are sort of serial marking of herself, does that mean like it's just been a veil of tears for her the entire time? That she has so many tattoos because she's suffered so many attacks?
I just felt things like so many things happen to her. It's just like showing it.
So this is a way of showing. It's like it's a history of herself. All these tattoos are marks of pain that she's inflicted on herself to kind of call to her mind pain that she's experienced before.
Yeah, I was just gonna say when she gets the tattoo around her ankle, the guy who's getting the tattoo says like, "Oh, it's in a sensitive place, it's gonna really hurt." She says like, "I don't care, it's a reminder," and yeah, it's just like.
Yeah, is that a good pain for her? When you nicely called to mind exactly what she says in the passage, it's almost like a good pain. It's like that workout pain, right? She wants to suffer that pain for some reason. Gabrielle, you were going to make a comment?
Oh, well, just, I don't know, like, in regards to that pain, it's kind of like the physical representation of the fact that she's been in a lot of pain, but also that she's made it through that pain, kind of like, I'm stronger than I think I am, like, all this has happened to me, but I think this is like what you were saying.
Yeah.
I'm still going strong, like,
yeah. It's that notion of certainty, right, that I'm still here, I can still feel this. You know, I'm going to put this on my body because it's proof to me that I'm alive, right? I'm still here, and you can't. That didn't destroy me, right? I'm still able to master my own body, right? So that the pain then becomes that idea of certainty, or it's like a representation of certainty that I can do it to myself. I can feel it, right? You can't take that from me. So there, in that way, it's a sort of a marking the boundaries, right, of herself. That's one, you know, there's no question pain is a big part there of the way it wants to tell the story. So let's turn to then the bigger question was, in the last couple minutes here, what would you argue if you just had to like sum it up based on the way we've talked about the novel so far? What would you argue is, why is the novel so concerned with pain? Take a second to just bat that question around with someone sitting next to you, and then we'll take the last couple minutes to talk about what you come up with. Why is this novel obsessed with pain?
I think it's just a way of sending messages. So bad.
Yeah, it's explaining how desiccated because of yeah, I mean, it's hard because we've seen how Solander takes with it. We haven't seen like the culmination of Hendrik's pain.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, he finally took one. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna try to figure out this one.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it took him a while, right? But he was just like, hey, this is something not do. So he actually makes it wrong. Oh, I think it's universal.
Yeah, keep everybody can relate to pain.
Okay, let's. And we're going to run out of time here in a second, or we'll have to quit here in a second. So let's just turn to the class then. Why is this novel so obsessed with pain? James?
It's easily relatable. I think everybody can relate to pain, and everybody's experience, and I think that might be something. If everybody can relate to it, it makes it better read.
Okay, so it's a means of allowing the reader to relate to the events in the novel. Although one might say, in response to that, there's these experiences of pain, death, rape, etc., that may be hard to relate to, and that there are such extreme events in the way they're depicted, right? That may make it difficult to relate to them. You have a good point. I'm not questioning that, but just playing devil's advocate to keep the conversation going. Yeah.
Okay. I think that it's also really about how different people cope with pain.
Okay.
Because the depiction of Heinrich is much different than like Solander, even though they both talk through a lot. So Heinrich is kind of like shriveled up and like he's just gotten a lot older, just like obsessive over it. Whereas Solander is like getting tattoos and like really working to overcome his pain and making it greater and stronger.
Okay, so that there's that it's an account of different ways of responding to extreme pain in that way. Shows these different experiences. Yeah, Cassie and then Austin. Okay, so it's explanation of action based on. I'm going to put just embracing pain as like this idea of like inflicting it on others or something like that. Yeah, Austin.
Well, trying to get even at the same time. I know that sketch with Geller song, trying to get back Persian River, and even Lindquist trying to do the different stuff.
So it's part of a moral economy. That's kind of the melodramatic reading. That pain is a way of making. Then we get back to that's why we start with melodrama in a way that it's a way of talking about moral value of the characters. And when we see them suffering, then we are reminded of their moral status, whether good or bad, right? The villain, Björnman, versus the victim, Solander, and that drives home some of the moral arguments that the novel makes. Schwen, you had your hand up?
No, so I'd like to point out that the book is called Men Who Hate Women.
Right.
The first page talks about the statistics of how men mistreat women. And I don't think it's just the beginning of the book. I think it ties up throughout the book. And it might be foreshadowing.
Okay, so there's it's also about Swedish. We'll put the Swedish title, Men Who Hate Women. It thematizes pain, right? That is, men who hate women, men who inflict pain on women, right? And let's look at what that is, what that's about. And so that's in the title of the novel, that theme, and as a result, you see a lot of pain. We got to quit right now, so we'll leave it there. We'll pick back up with finishing up the novel next week. See you then.